The dust never settled on Luna. A fact Dr. Eris Thorne found perversely comforting. Here in the Sol archive, buried deep beneath the sea of serenity, the recycled air was so pure you could taste the metallic tang of the filtration systems. A constant reminder that life was an artificial, deliberate act. Outside, the regolith lay in a state of perpetual, silent stillness, undisturbed for eons except for the ghostly footprints of long-dead astronauts and the newer, sharper tracks of the automated sentinels that patrolled the archive's perimeter. Inside, however, the dust of history was in constant, agitated motion. It swirled in the data streams, collected in the forgotten corners of encrypted servers, and settled in the minds of men like Eris. A fine, gray powder of things left unsaid. His official title was Senior Ontological Archivist, a grandiloquent way of saying he was a professional rememberer for a species that had become dangerously good at forgetting. His job was to curate the official narrative, the clean, digestible history of humanity's stoic survival after the collection. He maintained the public records of the 50 years of cold, quiet tension with the species known as the Vex, the 50 years since they had appeared in the skies above Mars and, without a single shot fired, harvested the entire planet. They hadn't conquered it, they had curated it. The Vex, as their initial and only broadcast explained, were cosmic archivists. They traveled the void not for resources or territory, but for significance. When they encountered a species that reached a certain threshold of cultural or biological uniqueness, they accessioned it, preserving a perfect specimen of that civilization at its peak in their grand archive, a place somewhere in the dark between galaxies. They had deemed humanity worthy. Mars, with its 4 million souls, its burgeoning, terraformed ecosystems, and its unique off-world culture, was the chosen sample. They took it all the cities, the canyons, the people. They even took a neat, spherical section of the atmosphere, leaving a shimmering, concave wound in the sky. Their message, translated and broadcast across Earth, was not a declaration of war, but a certificate of achievement. You are chaotic, ephemeral, beautiful. The synthesized voice had droned, devoid of malice or triumph. Your existence is a fleeting note in the cosmic symphony. We have chosen to record your melody before it fades. It is an honor. And then, silence. 50 years of it. Earth had not responded. Not officially. The governments of the world formed a unified front, the Terran Mandate, and presented a face of grim resolve to their own people. The official history, the one Aris was paid to maintain, spoke of resilience. It spoke of Project Stronghold, the massive fortification of the inner solar system. It spoke of the Sentinel fleets, Black Hold, menacing ships that now patrolled the Kuiper Belt, a silent, brooding line drawn in the void. It was a story of a species that had looked into the indifferent eyes of a godlike predator and refused to flinch. But Eris, whose older sister, Lena, had been on Mars teaching xenobotany at the Lowell Institute, knew the official story was a lie. The silence from Earth wasn't the silence of resilience. It was the silence of a held breath before a scream. It was the silence of a workshop where something terrible was being forged. His true work began after the archive's lumens dimmed for the designated sleep cycle. He would navigate the dark net of the Mandate's internal servers, a ghost in their machine, hunting for the real story. He was searching for the dust that had been intentionally swept under the rug. He found it on the 262nd day since the collection. It wasn't a file, it was a scar, a corrupted data fragment lodged in the diagnostic log of a decommissioned server that had once belonged to the Mandate's Office of Strategic Memetics. The file was designated Zero Protocol, a classification that, according to official doctrine, did not exist. It took him 3 weeks to bypass the layers of lethal encryption, each one designed to obliterate the intruder and the data itself upon detection. He worked with a cold, obsessive focus, the ghost of Lena's laughter echoing in the sterile silence of his apartment module. When the final firewall crumbled, it didn't open into a trove of military secrets or fleet deployments. It opened into a single, encrypted audio log, accompanied by a cascade of linguistic analyses and mimetic contagion models that made his blood run cold. He initiated the audio playback, and a woman's voice, calm and clear, filled his small room. Log entry 1. This is Dr. Alara Vance. The erasure doctrine is active. Phase 1 is complete. Iris leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The erasure doctrine. He'd seen the term once before, in a heavily redacted psychiatric evaluation of a high-ranking general who had taken his own life. It had been dismissed as a paranoid delusion. The voice continued, layered over the faint, almost subliminal hum of a quantum computer. The target is not their infrastructure. It is their identity. The Vex define themselves by their collection, by their perfect, unchanging memory. Their language is not merely a tool for communication, it is their archive, a living record of every species they have honored. Every nuance of their grammar, every syntactical rule is a monument to a dead civilization. Eris pulled up the accompanying data. It was a complete deconstruction of the Vex language, a language that was impossibly complex. With a tense structure that could delineate an event's exact position in spacetime relative to every other event ever recorded. It wasn't just a language, it was a unified field theory of history. To speak it was to access the entirety of their collected knowledge. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. "We did not send a fleet, Doctor." Vance's voice continued, a chilling placidity in her tone. "We did not send a weapon. We sent a story, a mimetic virus, encoded in a single, complex glyph and broadcast on a tightly focused tachyon beam aimed at their central linguistic codex on Vex Prime. The story is a paradox, a logical impossibility structured as a creation myth. It introduces a single, foreign concept into their otherwise perfect language, the idea of a memory that can be willingly forgotten. The screen filled with branching diagrams, showing how the viral glyph would be absorbed by the Vex Codex. It was designed to be dormant, a sleeper agent in their lexicon. It would be treated as a linguistic curiosity, an artifact from a primitive species. It would be studied, cataloged, and, inevitably, integrated. The initial effects will be undetectable, Vance explained. A subtle shift in verb conjugation, a new, hypothetical past tense for events that might have been but weren't. But over a generation, the paradox will unfold. The virus will teach their language how to lie. It will create the capacity for doubt, a species whose identity is based on the absolute certainty of memory will begin to question its own records. The monuments in their grammar will begin to crack. Eris felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't war. It was deicide. Humanity hadn't built a bigger sword. It had forged a pathogen that attacked the enemy's soul. He thought of the official narrative, of the Sentinel fleets holding the line. It was all a performance, a grand piece of theater to distract the galaxy and their own people, while the real war was being fought in the syntax of an alien mind. Decades ago, the Vex saw humanity as a specimen to be bottled and placed on a shelf. In response, humanity had decided to burn down their entire museum, not with fire, but by making them forget they'd ever built it. The audio log was nearing its end. Dr. Vance's calm was finally breaking, a slight tremor entering her voice, the sound of a creator gazing in horror and awe at her creation. They called our refusal to be archived a sign of our primitivism, our irrational attachment to a fleeting, individual existence. Perhaps they're right. A more advanced species might have negotiated. A wiser species might have accepted their place in the cosmos. But we are not advanced. We are not wise. We are human, and we do not bury our dead in the archives of our enemies. Eris scrolled to the final file attached to the log. It was a simulation, a projection of the virus's long-term effects. It showed the Vex language slowly degrading. Records would become unreliable. Historical accounts would contradict one another. Their perfect, unified memory would fracture into competing narratives, then into myths, then into nonsense. An entire species, defined by what they remembered, would be forced to forget. They wouldn't die in a blaze of glory. They would simply fade out, their own history turning to incomprehensible gibberish in their minds. The last thing Dr. Vance said on the recording would haunt Eris for the rest of his life. They wanted to honor us with a place in their collection, so we will honor them back. We will turn their entire civilization into a single, forgotten exhibit in a museum that no longer exists. Zero protocol complete. The log ended. Aris leaned back in his chair, the silence of his room suddenly feeling vast and suffocating. He had spent his life meticulously curating humanity's past, but he now understood that the most important part of that history had been deliberately and perfectly erased. The war wasn't coming. The war had already been won, 50 years ago, with a single word, and he was standing in the quiet, echoing aftermath, a lone archivist who had just discovered that his species, the chaotic, beautiful, primitive species the Vex had sought to preserve, had committed the coldest, most profound act of genocide in the history of the known universe. He looked at the star charts on his wall, at the distant, cold light of the star the Vex called home. He was not looking at an enemy. He was looking at a ghost. The days that followed were a study in controlled paranoia. Eris moved through the pristine, white corridors of the Soul Archive like a man carrying a live grenade in his pocket. The hum of the life support systems, once a comforting drone, now sounded like a countdown. The cheerful, synthesized voice that announced the daily work cycle felt like a mockery. He performed his duties with the numb precision of an automaton, curating the heroic, hollow narrative of humanity's 50-year vigil, while the truth burned a hole in his consciousness. The lie was not a simple omission. It was an architectural masterpiece. He saw it everywhere now. The news feeds celebrating the launch of the new Vigilance-class destroyers for the Sentinel fleet were not reports on military readiness. They were brushstrokes on a grand canvas of misdirection. The public service announcements praising humanity's unbreakable spirit were not morale boosters. They were incantations designed to ward off uncomfortable questions. Humanity was not holding its breath. It was staring at its own reflection in a two-way mirror, admiring its stoicism, completely unaware of the cold, dark room on the other side. He started digging again, but this time with a different purpose. He wasn't searching for the truth anymore. He was searching for its architects. The name from the audio log, Dr. Ilara Vance, became his obsession. According to the public record, she was a brilliant but obscure linguist who had died in a shuttle accident 20 years ago, a tragic loss for the academic community. Her files were clean, almost surgically so. Too clean. There were no personal letters, no controversial theses, no messy academic rivalries. Her entire life had been curated, sanitized, and archived with the same bloodless efficiency as the history of the Vex War itself. Aris knew a redacted life when he saw one. He was a professional, after all. He bypassed the public servers and delved into the encrypted personnel records of the early Terran Mandate, looking for the ghosts in the machine that had built Zero Protocol. He found whispers, fragments of a shadow directorate that had operated outside the normal chain of command, a group referred to in budgetary black files only as the Ontological Committee. They had no headquarters, no roster, just an impossibly large, untraceable budget, and a mandate that seemed to involve narrative warfare. His search made him reckless. He spent too long on secure servers, left faint digital footprints in places no archivist should ever go. He knew the risks, but the alternative to live alone with this monstrous truth was a slow, quiet madness he could not endure. He had to know who else was in the dark room with him. He had to see their faces. The answer came not in a data file, but in a knock on his door. It was a physical knock, a series of soft, deliberate raps on the composite metal of his apartment module's entrance, a sound so archaic and out of place in the automated world of the archive that it sent a jolt of pure, primal fear through him. He froze, his screen showing a half-decrypted schematic of a mandate black site in the Ort cloud. He didn't have a physical doorbell because no one ever visited unannounced. Visitors were scheduled, their credentials cleared, and their arrival announced by a polite chime from the home interface. A knock was an intrusion. It was a message. He blanked his screen and walked to the door, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He activated the external optic, and his blood went cold. Standing in the hallway was a man he had never seen before, dressed in the simple gray fatigues of the archive's maintenance staff. The man was unassuming, with thinning hair and a placid, almost bored expression. But his eyes were ancient. They were the eyes of someone who had stood on the other side of the two-way mirror for a very long time. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking directly at Eris, through the door, as if the metal were glass. Eris opened the door. He knew there was no other choice. Dr. Thorn, the man said. His voice was calm, conversational. It was the same placid tone as Dr. Vance's on the audio log. My name is Kalen. I apologize for the intrusion. We need to talk about your recent archival inquiries. He didn't ask to come in. He simply stepped past Aris, his movements fluid and confident. He surveyed the small apartment, his gaze lingering for a moment on the worn photo frame on Aris's desk, the one holding a picture of Lena standing in the red dust of Mars, smiling, her face full of a hope that now seemed like a cruel joke. The Zero Protocol file, Kalen said, turning back to face him. A fascinating piece of history, isn't it? We were wondering when someone with the right combination of clearance, curiosity, and grief would finally stumble upon it. Eris felt the last of his strength drain away. You knew. You let me find it. let you know. Dr. Thorn. We guided you, Kalen corrected gently. Think of it as the final stage of a security audit. The locks were designed not just to keep people out, but to see who was skilled enough to get in. Congratulations. You passed. Passed what a test to see if I could uncover a genocide. Eris shot back, a surge of defiant anger cutting through his fear. Kalen's expression didn't change. Genocide is such a biological term. So, physical. What happened to the Vex was more of a civilizational corrective. A software patch. They had a bug in their code, the belief that they had the right to collect other sentient life. We simply helped them delete it. And in the process, they deleted themselves. It was very efficient. He walked over to the viewport, which offered a stunning panoramic view of the Earth hanging like a blue marble in the blackness. You look at Earth, at the Sentinel fleets, at our 50 years of quiet defiance, and you see a lie. I see the most successful act of preservation in human history. We didn't save humanity by building better ships. We saved it by understanding that a true predator doesn't attack the body. It attacks the mind. You erased a species, Eris whispered, the words tasting like ash. My sister, the 4 million people on Mars. They died for nothing if this is what we became. On the contrary, Kalen said, his voice hardening for the first time. They died so we could have the justification, the moral authority, to do what was necessary. Their collection, as you call it, was a gift. It removed the shackles of conventional morality. It allowed us to see the Vex not as a rival empire, but as a philosophical threat. An idea. And you cannot kill an idea with a missile. You kill it with a better one. Or, in this case, a more corrosive one. He turned from the window, his calm demeanor returning. Dr. Ilara Vance was a genius. She understood that the Vex's strength, their perfect collective memory, was also their most profound weakness. A structure with no flexibility is brittle. All she did was introduce a single grain of sand, the concept of a lie, and the entire edifice of their reality collapsed over the next 2 generations. No war, no invasion, no martyrs. Just silence. Kalen took a small, flat device from his pocket and placed it on Aris's desk. He tapped its surface, and a holographic image flickered to life in the air between them. It was a live feed. The image was grainy, transmitted across an unimaginable distance, but the content was clear. It showed a Vex. Eris had only ever seen them in the single, sterile image they had broadcast 50 years ago. Tall, elegant, crystalline beings. The creature in the hologram was a grotesque parody of that image. It was hunched, its crystalline structure clouded and fractured. It moved erratically, tracing meaningless patterns on the floor of a decaying chamber, its limbs twitching. It was muttering to itself in a garbled, broken version of the complex Vex language, a stream of syntactical errors and nonsensical tenses. It was like watching a supercomputer suffer from dementia. This is Vex Prime, Kalen said softly. As of this morning, they are not dead. Dr. Thorn. They are untethered. A species lost in the fog of its own forgotten history. They wander the ruins of their perfect cities, unable to remember how to maintain them. They can no longer access their own archives because they can no longer properly speak the language that is the key. They have become ghosts in their own home, haunted by memories they can no longer trust. Aris stared at the pathetic creature, and for the first time, he felt not just horror, but a profound, soul-crushing pity. He had wanted justice for Lena, for Mars. He had imagined a war of righteous fury, of human defiance against the odds. He had never imagined this slow, quiet, pathetic unraveling. This was not a victory. It was a lobotomy performed on an entire species. Kalen switched off the hologram. The room was silent again. The Ontological Committee has been watching you, Eris. We see your talent. We see your dedication to the past. The official history you maintain is a vital part of the lie that keeps humanity safe and sane. But there is another archive that needs a keeper. The real one. The one that contains the Zero Protocol and the other. Necessary measures we have taken to ensure our survival. It is an archive that must be protected. Understood. And, when necessary, used. We are not monsters. We are librarians of a very dangerous collection, and we would like you to be our new senior archivist. He paused, letting the weight of the offer settle in the room. This is not a request. Your discovery of the file was the final part of your interview. You can either walk through the door with me and help us bear the burden of what we've done, or you can stay here and become a loose end. And, as you now know, our methods for tidying up loose ends are exceptionally thorough. He gestured to the photo of Lena. We ensure nothing is left to be remembered. Do you understand? Aris looked from the photo of his smiling sister to the cold, patient eyes of the man who had helped orchestrate the damnation of an entire species to avenge her. He was being offered a choice between two betrayals: betray his own morality and become a guardian of the atrocity, or betray the memory of his sister by being erased himself. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and absolute, a perfect echo of the silence between the stars where the Vex used to be. Harris looked at the photograph of his sister, her bright, unburdened smile a relic from another universe. Then he looked back at Kalen, the man who was offering him a place among the gods, who had sculpted this new, silent reality. The choice, he realized, was not a choice at all. It was an autopsy. He could either lie on the table or learn to hold the scalpel. All right, Eris said. The word a small, dead thing in the quiet room. I'll go with you. Kalen offered a thin, almost imperceptible nod, the barest acknowledgement of Eris's capitulation. There was no triumph in his expression, only a quiet, procedural finality. The process of Eris Thorne's second death, the death of his identity as a simple archivist, was as efficient and sterile as everything else the committee did. Within the hour, he was gone from the Sol Archive. There was no formal resignation, no packing of personal effects. His existence was simply redacted. Kalen led him to a nondescript maintenance transport, a ship designed to look like a slow-moving orbital debris collector. Inside, there was no crew, only the low hum of an advanced, silent drive. The journey was long and disorienting, a passage through the deep, empty spaces of the solar system where no one ever went. They passed the fortified lines of the Sentinel fleet, their black hulls like sleeping predators. And Eris felt a cold irony. He was passing through the very lie he used to help maintain, heading toward the terrible truth it was designed to hide. Their destination was a place that did not officially exist, a black site designated the Mnemonic Vault, carved into a rogue planetoid captured in a stable orbit at the very edge of the Oort cloud. From the outside, it was indistinguishable from any other chunk of ice and rock. Inside, it was a cathedral of silence. The vault was not a military base. It was a monastery dedicated to the study and weaponization of memory. The central chamber was a vast, cylindrical space. The walls were not metal, but floor-to-ceiling server stacks, their indicator lights pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, like a galaxy of captive stars. Hollow tanks floated in the zero-gravity center, displaying not tactical maps, but the complex, branching structures of alien languages, the delicate filigree of cultural mythologies, the raw data of 1,000 burgeoning civilizations, all under meticulous, predatory observation. The handful of people moving through the space were not soldiers. They were academics, linguists, sociologists, mimetic engineers, the blacksmiths of Zero Protocol. They moved with a quiet, reverent purpose, and everywhere, etched into the dark metal of the archways, was the vault's single guiding principle, silentium est sanctitas. Silence is sanctity. Kalen led him to an office overlooking the central chamber. A woman stood with her back to them, watching a complex Signian epic poem deconstruct itself in a holotank. She was older, with a severe haircut and a posture as unyielding as the station's hull. "Director Rostova," Kalen said. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne." Director Eva Rostova turned. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky and held the same chilling clarity. She had been one of the original members of the Ontological Committee, a direct subordinate of Alara Vance. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice a low, precise instrument. "Welcome to the real archive, the one where history is not curated, but written. And, when necessary, unwritten." She gestured toward the vast chamber below. The Vex were a proof of concept, a demonstration of the fundamental truth of the modern cosmos. The most powerful weapon is not a warhead, but a perfectly constructed narrative, a story that can make a species doubt itself, then hate itself, then simply stop. Aris found his voice, a faint echo in the profound quiet. "You're still doing it. You're watching other species." "Watching? Of course," Rostova replied without a trace of apology. "Any species that develops interstellar capability becomes a potential existential threat. We don't wait for them to point a gun at us. We study their psychology, their art, their foundational myths. We learn what they love, what they fear, and what holds them together. We find the load-bearing walls of their identity, and then we file away the blueprints for their demolition. It is the ultimate deterrent, the promise not of mutual destruction, but of unilateral erasure." His first assignment was a testament to their chilling pragmatism. He was given access to a complete cultural and linguistic profile of a species from the TRAPPIST system, a race of silicon-based life forms they called the Geodes. The geodes communicated through resonating crystalline frequencies, creating complex symphonies of shared consciousness. They had no concept of the individual, only the we of the collective. They were peaceful, inquisitive, and on the verge of developing a faster-than-light drive. His task was to analyze their language and identify a potential mimetic payload. He was to design a weapon that could be used against them. For weeks, Aris worked in a state of moral freefall. He immersed himself in the geode's beautiful, complex world of harmonic thought. He saw their art cathedral-sized crystal formations that sang the history of their star. He saw their love, a perfect, selfless resonance between nodes of the collective. He was a naturalist cataloging a beautiful, innocent creature all while sharpening the knife that might one day be used to dissect it. The work was horrifying, and he was terrifyingly good at it. His mind, trained to find patterns and connections in historical data, saw the flaw in their design almost immediately. Their strength, their perfect unity, was their vulnerability. They had no concept of a secret, no capacity for a thought that was not shared. He wrote the report, his fingers feeling like alien appendages on the console. He outlined a mimetic agent, not a paradox like the one used on the Vex, but something even more insidious. A solo-frequency virus. A concept, delivered via a targeted resonance broadcast, that would introduce the idea of a singular, private thought, the I. In a purely collective consciousness, the emergence of the self would not be a breakthrough, it would be a cancer. It would create dissonance, then distrust, then fragmentation. The symphony of the we would shatter into the screeching cacophony of a billion terrified eyes. It would be a weapon that made an entire species go insane from loneliness. He filed the report, feeling a part of his own soul fracture and fall away. He had become a monster, but as he settled into his new, damned role, he began to see that the vault was not the monolith of cold, unified purpose it appeared to be. He noticed the whispers in the data, the ghosts left behind by its architects. Ilara Vance, the architect of the erasure doctrine, had left traces, like a programmer leaving comments in the source code of reality. While running a diagnostic on the very analytical software he had used to condemn the geodes, he found something that should not have been there. It was a hidden subroutine, locked behind Vance's personal encryption key, a key he only recognized from the Zero Protocol file. It took him a week of sleepless nights to crack it. The subroutine was not another weapon. It was the opposite. It was a sophisticated diagnostic tool he could only describe as a mimetic immunizer. It was designed to analyze an ontological weapon like his solo-frequency virus and generate a conceptual counteragent, a vaccine of ideas that could strengthen a culture's identity against that specific line of attack. It was a tool for preservation, not destruction. It was a shield, hidden inside the plans for the sword. Why would Ilara Vance, the woman who had perfected the art of erasing species, create a tool designed to save them? He looked at the lines of code, a secret language within a secret world, and a new, dangerous thought began to form in his mind. The official history of the committee was that Vance had died in a shuttle accident. But what if that, too, was a curated lie? What if the creator of the erasure doctrine had developed a conscience? What if she had realized the true nature of the monster she had unleashed and had built a secret, hidden hope for redemption into the very heart of the machine she created? He was the senior archivist of the most terrible library in the universe. He was its prisoner and its priest. But as he stared at Vance's hidden code, he realized he might also be its saboteur. He had the schematics for the prison's walls, and he had just found a crack. The discovery of Vance's immunizer program was a single point of light in an otherwise suffocating darkness. It was a secret he held close, a spark of defiance in the cold, sterile heart of the mnemonic vault. He continued his work, designing ever more elegant and horrifying methods of cultural annihilation for species he would never meet, his reports earning him commendations from Director Rostova for their incisive clarity. He played the part of the converted, the pragmatist who had accepted the grim necessities of humanity's survival. But every night, in the stolen hours of his designated sleep cycle, he worked on the hidden subroutine, learning its nuances, exploring its potential, It was a key. But he didn't yet know what lock it was meant to turn. His chance came disguised as a crisis. A priority alert rippled through the vault, the first of its kind in Aris's tenure. The calm, monastic atmosphere was shattered by a quiet, controlled urgency. He was summoned to the central command chamber, where Director Rostova stood before a massive holotank displaying a swirling, chaotic stream of data from the galactic rim. "Report," Rostova commanded, her voice cutting through the low hum of the servers. A grim-faced analyst, a man named Jean, stepped forward. "Director, it's the Ethel. We've detected a massive, coordinated transmission originating from their home system. It's not a communication, it's a broadcast. They're projecting a mimetic signature." Aris felt a chill crawl up his spine. The Ethel were a species the committee had been watching for decades. They were ephemeral, quasi-energy beings who existed as complex patterns of light and thought within the nebulae of the Cygnus Rift. Their language was a form of collective dreaming. Their civilization, a shared, evolving consciousness. According to the Vault's threat assessment, they were classified as philosophically passive and low risk. A mimetic signature, Rostova's voice was sharp. Of what nature, Jian swallowed, his eyes flicking nervously toward the holotank. "It's Vex. Director, the signature is an almost perfect replica of the pre-collapse Vex linguistic core. It's a broadcast of their old identity, their memory." The room fell into a profound silence. The Vex were supposed to be a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered in the dark. They were a weapon that had been fired and had done its work perfectly, fading into a pathetic, incoherent ruin. The idea that their essence, the very thing Zero Protocol had been designed to erase, could reappear on the other side of the galaxy was a strategic impossibility. "How?" Aris asked, the word escaping his lips before he could stop it. Rostova turned her cold eyes on him. "That is precisely the question. Dr. Thorne." The Ethel had no known contact with the Vex. They exist in entirely different modes of reality. For them to replicate the Vex linguistic core is like a stone learning to sing a song it has never heard. "Unless," Jean added, his voice barely a whisper, "the song was already in the stone." The implications were staggering. Zero Protocol was based on the assumption that the Vex's archive was contained within their language and their technology. But what if it was more fundamental? What if, on some quantum level, their collection had left an imprint on the fabric of space-time itself? What if the Ethel, sewing with their unique, energy-based consciousness, had inadvertently read the ghost of the Vex from the universe's background radiation? The ghost of their erased memory was now being rebroadcast, a mimetic plague threatening to leak back into the galaxy. "This is not a threat. It is an existential contagion," Rostova declared, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "If the memory of the Vex is allowed to propagate, then the foundation of our entire security doctrine, the principle of erasure, is rendered meaningless. The Vex cannot be allowed to have a legacy. They cannot become martyrs. They must remain a perfect zero." She turned to her command staff. "Prepare the Ouroboros protocol for deployment against the Ethel home system." Aris felt his blood turn to ice. He knew of the Ouroboros protocol. It was the Vault's nuclear option, the final, brutal answer to any problem. It was not a mimetic weapon. It was a physical one, a sequence of precisely targeted micro-black holes designed to destabilize a star, forcing it to go supernova and scouring the entire system of all life, energy, and information, leaving nothing behind but expanding plasma. It was the ultimate act of redaction. "Director, wait," Aris pleaded, stepping forward. "The Ethel are not hostile. They don't even seem to understand what they're broadcasting. They may have just found something, an echo, to annihilate an entire species for that. They are a vector for a disease we cured 50 years ago," Rostova countered, her eyes locking onto his. "We do not take chances with plagues. Doctor, we cauterize the wound." She turned away, dismissing him. "Jean, I want the targeting solution finalized within the hour." This was it, the moment he had been dreading, and, in a dark corner of his soul, preparing for. He had the shield Vance had built. He could not stand by and watch them burn an innocent species just to protect the sanctity of their original sin. As the command staff moved with grim efficiency, Eris slipped away, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the cage of his ribs. He returned to his terminal, his fingers flying across the console. He had one chance. He pulled up the solo-frequency virus he had designed for the geodes, the weapon that would introduce the concept of I into a collective consciousness. It was a brutal, elegant piece of mimetic engineering. He then activated Vance's hidden immunizer program and fed his own weapon into it. The subroutine whirred to life, its secret code analyzing the structure of his mimetic attack. It began to generate a counteragent. But Eris didn't want a vaccine. He wanted a key. He began to modify Vance's code, twisting its purpose. Instead of creating a shield to protect a culture, he began to reconfigure it to create a targeted filter. His idea was desperate, borderline insane. The Ethel were broadcasting the ghost of the Vex because their collective consciousness was a perfect, unfiltered receiver. He couldn't stop the broadcast, but maybe he could teach them how to ignore it. He started weaving the core concept of his eye virus into the fabric of the immunizer. He was not trying to shatter their collective, but to give it a new tool, the ability to differentiate, to create a conceptual boundary between self and other. He would teach their dreaming mind to recognize the Vex memory as a foreign thought, a nightmare that was not their own, and, in doing so, give them the ability to simply stop listening to it. It was a mimetic scalpel against a stellar sledgehammer. He had minutes before Rostova's order was finalized. He bypassed the vault's internal security, using the very back doors he had discovered while hunting for Vance's history. He compiled the modified immunizer into a single, complex glyph of light and frequency, a story that would whisper to the Ethel, "That which you hear is not you." He routed it through one of the vault's deep space observational arrays, aiming it directly at the heart of the Ethel's nebula. He cloaked the transmission as a standard diagnostic pulse, a fleeting scrap of data that would be lost in the noise of the vault's own surveillance. He pressed the key to send. The glyph, a fragile prayer of code and hope, shot out into the void at the speed of light. For a moment, nothing happened. He watched the main holotank in the command center, where the chaotic stream of the Vex broadcast continued unabated. Jan was counting down the final seconds before the Ouroboros protocol was locked and launched. 5, 4, 3. Then the data stream flickered. The angry, jagged patterns of the Vex meme began to soften, to lose their coherence. The broadcast didn't stop abruptly. It began to fade, like a signal losing its source, like a ghost realizing it was dead. The collective dream of the Ethel was waking up. "What is that?" Rostova's voice was a blade of ice. "Jean, What's happening to the signal? Gene stared at his console, his face a mask of disbelief. Director, the mimetic signature is degrading. It's gone. The ethel are still there, but the Vex broadcast has completely ceased. A heavy, electric silence descended on the command chamber. Everyone turned to look at Rostova. Her face was an unreadable mask, but her eyes, for the first time since Aris had met her, showed a flicker of something other than cold certainty. They showed a sliver of doubt. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over her staff, and then, with a terrifying, deliberate slowness, her eyes settled on Aris. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. He had saved the ethel, but in doing so, he had just signed his own death warrant. He had proven that there was another way, a way that was not built on the principle of absolute erasure. And in the mnemonic vault, heresy was a crime for which there was no absolution. The walk from the command chamber was the longest of Aris's life. No one touched him. No one spoke to him. 2 silent guards in the gray fatigues of the vault's internal security flanked him, their presence a physical manifestation of the invisible cage that had just snapped shut around him. They did not lead him to a holding cell or an interrogation room. They led him back to his own office, the place where he had both condemned and saved, and sealed the door behind him, leaving him alone in the sterile quiet. It was a classic committee tactic. He realized, not brute force, but psychological isolation. Let the silence do the work. Let the heretic sit in the scene of his crime and contemplate the perfect, absolute, and imminent nature of his own erasure. He sat at his console, the screen still showing the fading diagnostic signature of his unauthorized broadcast, a single, defiant pulse of light against an eternity of darkness. He looked at the photo of Lena on his desk. Had he honored her, or had he simply doomed another species in a different, more complicated way? He had forced a concept of self upon the ethel. He had saved them from fire. But had he condemned them to a future of loneliness, of discord, of all the million agonies that came with being an I instead of a we, the line between a vaccine and a virus, he was beginning to understand, was a matter of perspective. Hours passed. The lumens in his room dimmed and brightened, marking a day cycle that had no meaning in this timeless place. Finally, the door chimed softly and slid open. It was not a squad of guards. It was Director Rostova, alone. She entered the room with the same unyielding posture, her face a mask of cold composure. She looked at him not with anger, but with a kind of weary, clinical disappointment, like a researcher examining a flawed specimen. "Do you have any idea what you have done, Doctor?" she asked, her voice low and even. "I saved a species from annihilation," Aris answered, his own voice steadier than he expected. "No," she corrected him, her tone as sharp and precise as a scalpel. "You gambled with the survival of our own. The principle of erasure is absolute for a reason. It is clean. It leaves no martyrs to be mourned, no legends to be whispered, no ghosts to haunt us. It is the only perfect guarantee of security. You have just undone 50 years of that perfection. You have proven that erasure is not the only option. And in doing so, you have created something far more dangerous than any alien fleet. You have created a precedent." She paced the small room, her movements economical and controlled. "You think you performed an act of mercy. What you actually did was leave a loose end. The Ethel will remember. They may not understand what happened, but their collective consciousness now contains a memory of being touched by an outside force, of being saved from a threat they didn't know existed. That memory will evolve. It will become a myth, a religion, a story, and stories, Doctor, are the one thing in this universe that can survive a supernova. You haven't just saved them, you've made them significant. You've put them on the map. You have turned an insignificant anomaly into a future variable, a potential threat we can no longer predict. So we should have burned them, Aris shot back, standing to face her. We should have committed another act of silent genocide just to protect the lie of our own perfect, cold-blooded efficiency. Is that what Lena died for? So we could become so terrified of ghosts that we start burning down innocent houses just in case they might one day become haunted. Rostova stopped, her eyes narrowing at the mention of his sister. Grief is a compromised analytical framework, Dr. Thorne. Your sister, and the 4 million souls on Mars, are the very reason the vault exists. Their sacrifice bought us the clarity to do what is necessary. Ilara Vance understood that. She created the doctrine because she knew that sentiment is a luxury a species fighting for its survival cannot afford. Did she? Aris challenged, his voice rising with a desperate conviction. Then why did she build the immunizer? Why hide a shield inside the sword? It wasn't a weapon. It was a question. She was asking if we were capable of anything else. She was testing us. Rostova's expression wavered for a fraction of a second, a hairline crack in the icy facade. You are romanticizing a dead woman's abandoned research project to justify your own treason. Before Aris could respond, a soft chime echoed through the room. It wasn't the door. It was the main console on Rostova's desk. A new icon had appeared on her private, high-security interface, an icon Aris recognized instantly. It was the same dormant, corrupted file marker he had found in the Soul Archive, the one that had led him to the Zero Protocol. But this one was pulsing with a soft, white light. It was active. Rostova stared at it, her composure finally breaking. A look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That file is a tombstone. It's Vance's failsafe, designed to wipe the entire vault's memory core if the station's integrity is ever compromised. It should not be active." "It's not a failsafe," Aris said, a wild, electrifying realization dawning on him. "It's a contingency. It's a dead man's switch, or a dead woman's. It needed a key to be activated, a specific, complex event." He looked from the icon to Rostova, his voice filled with a newfound certainty. It needed the core code of the immunizer to be successfully integrated with an offensive mimetic agent and deployed on a non-hostile target. It needed someone to see her question and answer it. With a trembling hand, Rostova touched the icon. The file opened. It was not a string of code. It was a face. A hologram of Dr. Ilara Vance flickered to life in the center of the room, projected from Rostova's own desk. She looked older than in her official photos, her face lined with a weariness that went bone deep, but her eyes held a fierce, undiminished intelligence. It was a pre-recorded message, a ghost in the machine she herself had built. "Eva," the hologram said, and Rostova flinched as if struck. Vance's voice was not the calm, placid instrument from the Zero Protocol log. It was filled with a sad, quiet resolve. "If you are seeing this, then the mnemonic vault has failed its primary purpose, and I am so sorry." The recorded Vance looked around, as if seeing the office, seeing the future she had set in motion. "I created the erasure doctrine to save us from the Vex. It was a necessary sin, a terrible but unavoidable choice. But I knew, even then, that the doctrine itself was a poison, a tool that perfect, that absolute, would corrupt any who wielded it. I built the vault not to be a weapon factory, but to be a cage, a place to contain the terrible idea I had unleashed, to study it, to control it, and to hopefully, one day, transcend it." Rostovus stood frozen, her face pale. "I knew you, Ava." Vance continued, her voice softening. "I knew your strength, your clarity, your unwavering belief. I knew you would become the doctrine's perfect warden. You would guard it, you would enforce it, and you would never question it. That is why I could not tell you the truth. The vault's true purpose was not to watch the stars for new enemies, but to watch humanity for a sign of hope. I built a test into its very foundation, a moral puzzle, and I waited for someone to come along who possessed not just the skill to find my hidden work, but the conscience to use it. Someone who would choose to build a shield instead of a sword, even at the risk of their own life." Vance's holographic eyes seemed to find Eris across the decades. "If you're seeing this, it means that person has arrived. The vault now has a new directive. My final protocol, the Ouroboros Protocol, is to be permanently decommissioned. All offensive ontological research is to be halted. The vault's new and only purpose is preservation, not of humanity through the erasure of others, but of the galaxy itself. We will become silent guardians, watchers who develop immunities, not plagues. We will study, we will understand, and we will protect. We will use our terrible knowledge to foster cosmic biodiversity, to ensure that no species ever has to face the choice we faced. We will atone." The hologram flickered. "The burden of this new directive will be heavy, Ava, perhaps too heavy for you to bear. But the choice is no longer yours. The directorship of the mnemonic vault is hereby transferred. The system recognizes a new administrator." Vance gave a final, sad smile. "Goodbye, my friend. Try to remember us not for the darkness we created, but for the light we hoped would one day follow." The hologram vanished. The room was plunged back into silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of a tomb, but of a world holding its breath before a new dawn. Rostova stood motionless for a long time, her face unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned, walked to the door, and left Eris alone. She did not look back. It was not a retreat. It was an abdication. Years later, Eris stood in that same office, looking out at the vast or silent chamber of the mnemonic vault. He was its director now, the reluctant heir to Vance's legacy. The holotanks no longer displayed blueprints for demolition. They showed the beautiful, complex symphonies of the geodes, the dreaming patterns of the Aethel, the nascent myths of a dozen new species taking their first steps toward the stars. The vault had become what Vance had always intended, not an arsenal, but a library, a place of understanding. The dust of history, he now knew, never settled. It was a living part of the atmosphere, a constant reminder of what was done and what could never be undone. His sister was gone, the Vex were gone, but their memory, once a weapon, had become the seed of a new philosophy. Eris was no longer just an archivist of the past. He was the lonely, vigilant guardian of a fragile future, his life's work a quiet, unending penance whispered to the stars, a promise that humanity would, at long last, learn to listen instead of erase.